The classroom buzzed with quiet snickers and whispers as a group of Crixan children surrounded Ethan, the lone human child in the class. Their pointed fingers and mocking voices felt like sharp barbs. "Why would anyone want to be friends with him?" one of the Crixans sneered, their scaled face glinting under the classroom lights. "He's weird-looking and so soft-bodied." Ethan's face turned crimson, his eyes fixed on the desk as he clutched his datapad tightly, wishing he could disappear. The teacher, a towering figure of the Lumian species with her skin shimmering like liquid light, overheard this while entering the classroom, her glow dimming slightly, a sign of quiet disapproval. Fixing the class with a calm yet piercing gaze, she said, "Enough. Dismissing someone because of how they look is a grave mistake, especially humans." One child, a small Ilori with large curious eyes, raised an eyebrow and muttered under his breath, "But they're so different." The teacher's gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. "They may not have scales or claws, but their strength lies in their hearts and minds. Let me share a story that will show you why judging others by their appearance is not only unfair, it's foolish." The room grew still, the curious stares of the children shifting to the teacher, their interest outweighing their teasing for now. The Braxxian invasion of Teralis was not an act of necessity, but one of arrogance and greed. For years, the Braxxian sovereignty and the Teralian Union had clashed over the mineral-rich asteroid belt that bordered their territories. While the Teralians proposed fair trade agreements and neutral arbitration, the Braxxians, driven by their expansionist ambitions, dismissed these efforts as weakness. They saw the belt as theirs by right, its resources a prize to fuel their growing empire. Negotiations crumbled under the weight of Braxxian hostility, and tensions flared when a Braxxian mining fleet mysteriously exploded near Teralis. The Teralians insisted it was a tragic accident caused by equipment failure. But the Braxxians used the incident as a pretext for war, claiming sabotage without evidence. The Braxxians launched their invasion with calculated malice, framing it as a justified retaliation while masking their true intent: total domination of the region. Teralis, a prosperous planet renowned for its thriving cities and rich ecosystems, became the focal point of their assault. Its strategic location near the asteroid belt made it an irresistible target, not only for the resources it controlled, but for the humiliation it would bring to the Teralians. The Braxxians saw the planet as a prize to be taken, its people as little more than obstacles to be crushed. The invasion began with ruthless precision. Braxxian warships descended on Teralis, obliterating its orbital defenses with devastating strikes. They severed communication lines and crippled the planet's power grids, plunging entire regions into darkness. Their attacks targeted civilian infrastructure as much as military assets, leaving cities in chaos and millions of Teralians vulnerable. While claiming they sought justice, the Braxxians inflicted untold suffering on a population that had done nothing to provoke such brutality. When the Teralian government pleaded for aid, they found themselves abandoned. Neighboring allies, wary of Braxxian threats, chose self-preservation over solidarity. The Braxxians had made it clear that any who dared to intervene would face the full might of their war machine. Fearing retaliation, the Teralians' allies turned their backs, leaving the planet to fend for itself against a vastly superior enemy. The Teralians listened to their refusals with growing despair. The allies they had fought alongside in many wars, those who had once sworn loyalty and friendship, had abandoned them to their fate. In their gilded halls and fortified worlds, the so-called allies watched from a distance, unwilling to risk their own security for a battle they deemed unwinnable. On Teralis, the silence from their allies was louder than the roar of the invading forces. Braxxian ground forces stormed Teralis with an unrelenting ferocity. Towering and heavily armored, their soldiers marched through cities and industrial zones, crushing any resistance underfoot. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, their homes reduced to rubble as the Braxxians methodically dismantled the planet's defenses. Their war machines rolled through the streets, spreading terror and destruction in their wake. To the Braxxians, this was not just a conquest, but a demonstration of their dominance, a warning to all who might oppose their ambitions. The Teralians fought valiantly, but their efforts were no match for the Braxxians' overwhelming force. Entire cities fell within days, their defenders either killed or forced into retreat. Yet even in the face of annihilation, the Teralians never reached out to humanity for aid. Few in the galaxy knew, but Teralis had been the species that introduced humanity to the Galactic Council only a few decades prior. When humanity had first stepped into the galactic stage, naive and inexperienced, it was the Teralians who had guided them, vouching for their inclusion and helping them find their footing. Now, as their home burned, the Teralians made the painful decision not to call on their former protégés. They knew humanity, still in its infancy, lacked the strength to stand against the Braxxians. To involve them would be to endanger an entire young species unnecessarily. Even in their darkest hour, the Teralians bore the weight of their suffering alone, refusing to let the Braxxians claim more victims. Their silence was not born of pride, but of a deep sense of responsibility for the fledgling species they had helped bring into the galactic fold. The Teralian Command Center was a hollow shell of its former self, a stark reflection of their leaders' unraveling hopes. Situated deep beneath the surface of the capital city, its reinforced walls once symbolized strength and resilience. Now they seemed to close in like a tomb. The faint hum of damaged power conduits and the flicker of malfunctioning screens underscored the chaos above. A massive central display dominated the room, its cracked surface distorting the grim reality it projected. The image of the capital city, once a thriving beacon of Teralian prosperity, was a nightmare of fire and ruin. Braxxian war machines moved methodically through the streets, their towering forms casting long shadows over the rubble. Explosions punctuated the silence, each blast tearing another piece from the defenders' crumbling line. The faces of the Teralian leaders were etched with exhaustion and despair. Their ceremonial attire was stained and torn, a far cry from the dignity they had once embodied. Counselor Vale, the planet's chief diplomat, sat slumped in a chair, her head in her hands. She had been the voice of reason during countless negotiations, her words once a source of unity and hope. Now they felt like ash in her mouth. General Kranos stood at the center of the room, his imposing figure now weighted with defeat. His armor, scratched and scorched from the initial Braxxian bombardments, bore the scars of a futile resistance. His voice, once commanding, cracked as he barked orders to the few remaining defense units. The holographic map before him showed the grim truth. Their forces were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the enemy's advance relentless. In one corner, a young officer worked frantically at a console, her hands trembling. She was trying to restore communications, hoping against hope to contact allies who had long since turned their backs. The static-filled responses only deepened the oppressive silence. A deep rumble shook the command center, dust cascading from the ceiling. The lights flickered, and a piercing alarm blared. The Braxxians were breaching the final defensive perimeter. The capital's shields, already pushed to their limits, were failing. Vale raised her head, her pale, tired eyes meeting Kranos. "It's over," she whispered, her voice heavy with sorrow. "We cannot hold." Kranos clenched his fists, his gaze fixed on the display. His silence spoke volumes. He knew she was right. The Teralians had fought with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. One by one, the others in the room stopped their tasks, the reality sinking in. The weight of their failure to protect their people was crushing. They had no escape plans, no secret weapon, no reinforcements. In their final moments, they turned their attention to a small, unassuming console in the corner, a repository of their planet's history, culture, and knowledge. Vale approached it with trembling hands, initiating a data transfer. If nothing else, they would ensure that the story of Teralis and its people would survive, even if they did not. "How long before we're completely wiped out?" Vale muttered, her voice hollow. Around her, her fellow commanders remained silent, their faces etched with the same defeat. They all knew it was over. The Braxxians were too powerful, their numbers too vast. No one would come to their aid. All of a sudden, through the static of the failing communications console, a voice crackled to life, barely audible over the chaos.
"Order your units to stand down. Take rest. We are here. We will take care of it."
The words hung in the air, almost unreal, as if spoken by a ghost. Before the Teralian leaders could process what they had heard, the skies above the capital city erupted. With a deafening shriek, hyperspace rifts tore through the darkened clouds, and hundreds of warships emerged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the unmistakable insignia of humanity. Their incursion brought hell to the Braxxians. The skies above Teralis were a violent storm of fire and fury. The Braxxian fleet, a vast armada that had once seemed an unstoppable force, was now facing a foe it could neither understand nor anticipate. The initial shock had struck when the human warships, sleek and nimble, appeared out of nowhere, emerging from hyperspace in a coordinated formation, their sleek hulls cutting through the darkened clouds like glinting knives. The Braxxian commanders scrambled in disbelief as their tactical screens flashed with unexpected data. Hundreds of vessels, human vessels, had appeared, their shields brimming with energy, their weapon systems powering up with a chilling precision. "What is this?" snarled Admiral Zaltharon, the once confident leader of the Braxxian fleet, now gripped by confusion and fear. His eyes darted over the tactical displays, which were showing no sign of any weakness in the human fleet. The humans were young, inexperienced, and yet their technology was far superior to anything the Braxxians had encountered. Their weapons, precise and relentless, cut through the Braxxian lines with an efficiency that defied logic. A volley of energy beams lanced out, striking the Braxxian flagship, Melkar's Wrath, and sending it into violent shudders. The impact left the vessel's hull cracked and smoking, and the ship's shields flickered under the onslaught. "They're targeting our engines, our weapons. How are they so precise?" Zaltharon barked at his officers, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of the threat. The Braxxian dreadnoughts, some of the largest warships in the galaxy, were being disassembled piece by piece. The humans' energy beams sliced through their reinforced armor like a blade through paper, and within moments the dreadnoughts were engulfed in explosions, their massive forms breaking apart in the vacuum of space. The Braxxian ships that survived the initial bombardment were now in chaos, firing blindly at the agile human fleet, but their efforts were futile. The humans moved with uncanny coordination, every ship knowing its position, every strike landing with deadly accuracy. "Return fire! Engage at maximum power!" Zaltharon ordered, his voice shaking. But the Braxxians were no longer in control of the battle. The humans' tactics were bewildering, their speed and precision outclassing the Braxxians' own. It was as though the humans knew every move the Braxxians would make before they made it. Above Teralis, the human fleet cut a path of destruction through the Braxxian forces, turning the tide of the battle. Hundreds of small, fast-moving ships, their hulls gleaming with the insignia of humanity, darted through the larger Braxxian ships with deadly precision. They were everywhere, firing, dodging, hitting critical weak points. Every Braxxian ship that tried to retaliate was met with an instant counterattack, their shield generators overloaded by concentrated fire. The Braxxian ships, once untouchable giants, were now retreating in disarray, their formations shattered as the humans picked them off one by one. On the surface of Teralis, the Braxxian ground forces were equally unprepared for the human onslaught. Their war machines, towering behemoths of steel and plasma, moved through the rubble of the capital city, crushing anything in their path. But as they advanced, they encountered human soldiers, dressed in powered exosuits that enhanced their strength and speed. The humans were faster, more agile, and their tactics far more coordinated than anything the Braxxians had anticipated. In the streets, Braxxian war machines unleashed devastating fire, turning entire buildings into rubble. But human soldiers equipped with advanced energy rifles targeted the weak points in the Braxxian armor with frightening accuracy. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, slamming into joints, powering down the massive war machines, disabling them one by one. The Braxxians were left flabbergasted, unable to understand how their might was being shattered with such efficiency. "How are they doing this?" a Braxxian ground commander shouted, his eyes wide in disbelief as another of their war machines fell before a squad of human soldiers. The humans seemed to anticipate every move, always one step ahead, and their weapons tore through their armored units as if they were nothing more than paper. On the battlefield, the human soldiers moved in perfect sync. Drones flew overhead, providing support and marking targets, while human infantry, shielded by personal energy barriers, advanced with machine-like precision. They cleared entire streets, pushing back the Braxxian forces and ensuring that the invaders could no longer maintain any foothold on the planet. It wasn't just a battle, it was a rout. Back in the Teralian command center, the atmosphere was one of disbelief and awe. The commanders who had resigned themselves to certain defeat now found themselves watching in stunned silence as the tide turned. On the massive central display, the once invincible Braxxian fleet was breaking apart, its ships retreating in a disorganized mess. On the ground, the Braxxian war machines were crumbling under the relentless assault of the human forces. Counselor Vale, her face pale from exhaustion and despair, now stood with wide eyes watching the unfolding miracle. Is this really happening? The humans, they're turning the tide. Her voice was soft, as if she couldn't believe the reality unfolding before her. General Kranos stood beside her, his expression unreadable. It's more than we ever hoped for. They're not just fighting, they're winning. He shook his head, as if in disbelief. How did they do this? A junior officer, eyes glued to her screen, let out a breathless gasp. They're weapons. They're cutting through the Braxxians like they're made of paper. Look, they're retreating. The Braxxian fleet they're running. It was true. The Braxxian fleet, once so confident in its overwhelming power, was now fleeing into hyperspace, unable to withstand the onslaught of humanity's precision and might. On the Braxxian flagship, Admiral Zal Tharan could only watch in awestruck silence as his forces were obliterated. His once proud fleet was reduced to scattered wreckage, and the human ships were not relenting. In a last-ditch effort to save face and avoid complete annihilation, he turned to his command console and issued a frantic retreat. All ships, now, jump to hyperspace. His orders were obeyed, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Just as the last of the Braxxian ships were vanishing into the swirling void of hyperspace, a lone transmission pierced the silence left in their wake. The voice that followed was calm, yet it carried the weight of unrelenting fury, a warning forged in steel. This is Commander Talon Graves of humanity. Teralis stands under our protection, and let this serve as a lesson to the Braxxians and any who dare to follow in their footsteps. Threaten our allies again, and you will not have the luxury of retreat. We do not forget. We do not forgive. Next time, there will be no mercy, only annihilation. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the stunned Braxxian crews in a cold, suffocating silence. Even the hum of their ship's engines felt diminished as the weight of humanity's power and resolve settled upon them. In the Teralian command center, the room erupted into a mixture of cheers and disbelief. The Braxxians, the galaxy's most feared conquerors, had been driven off, and Teralis had been saved. Vale stood at the console, her hands trembling. They did it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The once crippling despair that had haunted the command center lifted in an instant. The Teralians were no longer alone in the galaxy. Humanity had not only come to their aid, but had shown the entire galaxy what it meant to protect their allies. Teralis was safe, and the Braxxians would think twice before ever crossing humanity and Teralian again. As the teacher concluded the tale, the classroom was enveloped in a heavy stillness. The alien students, who had once mocked Ethan, now stared at him with wide eyes, their expressions a mixture of awe and newfound respect. It was as if they were seeing him for the first time, not as the soft-bodied human they had teased, but as a symbol of strength, loyalty, and unwavering courage. By the time the lesson ended, Ethan found himself surrounded by curious and enthusiastic classmates, all clamoring to know more about him, his people, and their storied bravery. In the span of a single story, Ethan had gone from being an outcast to a celebrity, a living link to the legendary protectors of the galaxy.